Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Albert Cho. After cutting diplomatic ties with Taiwan, now Liu has established relations with China. At the same time, the Wall Street Journal reported that Liu Jianchao is poised to succeed Wang Yi as China's foreign minister in March. These developments coincide with Xi Jinping's fox hunt initiative, raising questions about the Chinese Communist Party's ability to capture economic criminals fleeing the country. Joining us today are Courtney Donovan Smith, political analyst specializing in Taiwan, and Huang Kwei-bo, professor of diplomacy at the National Chengchi University. A very warm welcome to both on the show. So, Kwei-bo, what is your assessment of Liu Jianchao, China's possible next foreign minister? How could he impact the U.S. China relations?
I think so far we cannot lay too much of our hope on Liu Jianchao for his role in future U.S. China relations, mainly because first, he's not at on the position that can determine a lot of things, including policy making. And two, he hasn't had much experience in dealing with U.S.-China relations. Throughout his various positions, either within the party, like the deputy director of the Foreign Affairs Commission under the CPC, or the director of International Department under the CPC as well. In total, I think that those accounted for 6 years so far, but not directly towards the U.S. government, including both executive and legislative branches. So I think he needs to accumulate more experience before he can really, extend his influence on the policy making in Beijing towards the U.S. And also, I have to say that unless Liu Jianchao is one of the closest staff of Xi Jinping, he will not exercise a great deal of influence on mainland China's decision-making on U.S. relations. I think at most he would become a person who implements Xi Jinping's will and policies towards the U.S. And at most, he could probably become an observer and reporter to Xi Jinping as to what he saw and what he thinks about the U.S. and U.S. future policies towards mainland China. And also, at most, he probably needs to rely on Wang Yi, to grab more power before he can really become number one guy in mainland China.
In other words, this Liu Jianchao guy is quite new in terms of U.S.-China relations. Donovan, 59-year-old Liu Jianchao is a key figure in Xi Jinping's fox hunt operation. If you Google it, it's a secret global initiative aimed at capturing Chinese officials suspected of corruption who have fled abroad. So in what ways does Liu Jianchao's efforts towards U.S.-China relations align with Xi Jinping's regarding this?
Okay, well, Operation Fox Hunt and the related ones, Operation Skynet, and then they also have the secret police stations in the U.S. Really, it's not about capturing people who are corrupt, really. It fundamentally has been used for harassing, stalking, and using pressure against Chinese dissidents or people they don't like. Some of them may be genuinely corrupt, but they use it for a broad range of uses. And some of the people that they're using these tactics against are citizens of the countries. For example, in the United States, are often citizens of the United States and Canada and other countries as well. They do the same thing. Now, as to in what ways does Liu's approach toward U.S.-China relations align with Xi's, I think Dr. Huang summed it up neatly here. Fundamentally, the way the chain of command will go from Xi Jinping to Wang Yi, because Wang Yi is more important because the Chinese Communist Party outranks the government, and so Wang Yi is the director of the Chinese Communist Party's Foreign Affairs Committee, so he will outrank Liu. So he'll be the one who will be ordering Liu and telling him what to do, which is, as Dr. Huang noted. So he's going to be Liu, I think, is just going to be following orders. So it's going to align completely with Xi Jinping's because he's doing just what he's told.
Right. Okay, Kwei-bo, do you also have an observation of this fast hunt operation? Does it work in a way as Donovan just depicted in the U.S. that kind of doing something for the CCP regarding the political surveillance or gain more information from the U.S.?
I know little about that, but I think it's because it's a big difference between mainland Chinese political system and American political system.
Right.
So for something that cannot be allowed in the U.S. could be possible or feasible in mainland China. So I think for mainland China, if such fast hunt operation is an ongoing project or program, then I think mainland China needs to think twice whether or not that can be further implemented overseas.
Also, I have another question for you. Is the action taken by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, in January show a push towards improving diplomacy instead of the old-fashioned wolf warrior diplomacy? Now, seems not that anymore. Considering Wang Yi's diplomatic trips and Li Qiang leading a delegation to the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, what is Xi Jinping's goal?
I think Xi Jinping's goal is probably aimed at breaking the U.S. coalition consisting of various countries, either in the fields of military strategy, military security, or in the field of science and technology. Such a strong U.S. coalition has pushed mainland China not literally to the corner, but giving mainland China some hard time dealing with this, enormous U.S. pressure. So Li Qiang's going to World Economic Forum in Switzerland, to me, represents a strong desire for, showing these positive sides of mainland Chinese economic planning to the world, so that these foreign capitals can be, sent to mainland China as a boost for the growth of mainland China's economy. In the meantime, I think Li Qiang at the World Economic Forum would delineate an outlook for mainland China's economy, given these difficult times when the property market is down and when the unemployment rate is high, et cetera, et cetera. So I think bringing up some positive impression of mainland China to the world would be the first priority for Li Qiang at the World Economic Forum. And for Wang Yi, it's been a ritual that all mainland Chinese foreign minister would go to Africa as his first foreign visit every year. So Wang Yi did that too. And Wang Yi has been to Southeast Asia as well. So I think that's something to show to the so-called non-Western world that me, China, is treating you as my good friends. And I don't want to go to America, the UK, or Italy, and so on, but I would like to go to Africa, go to Southeast Asia, because we're really good friends. That's a way, I don't want to say it's a way to do the so-called United Front strategy, but it may be, because this is how diplomacy works.
Okay, Donovan, so is the CCP's diplomacy not wolf warrior anymore?
Yeah, they do seem to be toning it down. Previously, the most important thing to always remember when you're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party is that the number one rule is they want to maintain power domestically. Number two, they want to maintain power domestically. And number three, they want to maintain power domestically. That's their absolute priority, and everything kind of needs to be viewed through that prism. So it appears, as Dr. Huang noted, that they do, I think that because their economy has systemic issues, quite a few systemic problems, and so I think that they do feel that they need more more investment. They want other countries to come in and provide them with more, help pay for some of these systemic problems. It's always better to use someone else's money. But the wolf warrior thing was primarily for domestic consumption, for the little pink nationalists. Now they've shifted this. Instead of having this wolf warrior diplomacy, which offends all these diplomatic partners out there, what they've done is they've shifted the little pink's ire and hatred and fear and paranoia inward on foreigners residing in China. So they've recently come out with a lot of stories about foreigners spying and coming out with ways to teach people how to spot foreign spies, and so what's happening is, anecdotally, what we're hearing is that, well, we know that a lot of foreigners are leaving. You know, there's statistics on that. But anecdotally, one of the biggest reasons recently, even foreigners who stuck out COVID, is that more and more they're saying they're feeling hostility against them that wasn't there before. Suspicion, hostility, and paranoia toward them. Sometimes taxis are no longer picking them up, and and so life has become more and more unbearable. For example, the number of American students from before the pandemic, there was over 11,000 of them. Now there's something like 100 or 200 left. So I think that what they've done is they, where the wolf warrior there was to appease the nationalistic base within the country and fill them all up with nationalistic pride. They've shifted it to something else so that they can get on with the doing business overseas.
Well, actually, the wolf warrior is not only targeted against the foreigners staying in the domestic China, but also against Taiwan. Especially Wang Yi keeps saying that Taiwan is a part of China and there's no room for negotiation for that. Actually, considering developments in Taiwan, this brings the tension back to Taiwan. For example, visits from delegations from the U.S. and Europe, and in particular Lithuania. What should be the primary focus for Taiwan under Lai Ching-te? Donovan, you still go first.
Basically to continue with what the Tsai administration has been doing. Now, the Tsai administration's foreign policies and policies for dealing with China have been broadly popular. Some of not necessarily popular on domestic issues, but on those two issues, the Tsai administration has been quite popular. So when William Lai ran for president, he explicitly said that he was going to continue all the priorities that the Tsai administration has, and he emphasized that continuity. So because, so I don't think that we're going to see very much change. Primarily, I think we're going to see a continuation of a policy where the government here takes a firm stand on sovereignty, will not accept anything like the 1992 consensus, or anything that suggests there's a one China. Of course, there is going to maintain the status quo as best as possible. Obviously, the Tsai administration repeatedly said that she'd be happy to talk with China as long as Taiwan is treated with dignity. I think he'll continue forward with maintaining the name Republic of China. He's not going to change the Constitution or the flag or the name of the country or anything like that. And I think he'll be very proactive in maintaining relations with the United States, Japan, and other partners, both in the region and internationally. I mean, he himself is American educated. He went to Harvard. And I think the reason he chose the vice president that he did, Xiaobi Kim, the former Taiwan representative in Washington, D.C., who, by all accounts, is very well liked in Washington, D.C. By choosing her, I think Lai was sending a message domestically that his government was going to continue to prioritize these relationships with like-minded countries and strong supporters like the United States. But it also sends a message internationally, including to China, but also to the United States, that by choosing her, that means that his administration will prioritize these types of relationships.
Kwei-bo, so what about you? What should be the primary focus of diplomacy for Taiwan under Lai Ching-te? Say, going back to the normalcy of 92 consensus, or maybe, avoid, talking about the national name as Taiwan, but ROC more as an official name. What is your suggestion here?
I think I can predict what is going to happen before this coming November, before this U.S. presidential election, because before that, I think Lai Ching-te and his team would be exercising a lot of self-restraint in order to stabilize the situation in the Taiwan Strait. However, I think in terms of diplomacy, the Lai and his administration are going to face a great deal of pressure, mainly from Beijing, because you can tell that in the past 7.5 years, when Tsai Ing-wen has been president here, the Republic of China has lost 10 diplomatic allies.
Right.
That's unstoppable because Taiwan tried to retain a few, but failed. And Taiwan tried to establish some sort of relationships with non-diplomatic allies, but failed. So I think Lai Ching-te is going to face, some dilemma when he would like to seek some newer or broader international space for Taiwan, while he may be going to lose one or a couple more diplomatic allies because of Beijing's diplomatic struggle or competition. So I think, of course, Lai Ching-te would tell people, hey, look at these so-called substantive relations with the U.S., with Japan, with the EU. But I think that's important. But in terms of diplomatic allies, they are important as well. In English, it's like apple and orange. You cannot say, oh, this is important, this is not. No, because this official recognition from these allies, can the Republic of China be seen as an independent sovereign country? Without them, you got all these substantive relations, you are not going to be seen as a sovereign independent country. So, apple and orange, we don't compare.
Kwei-bo, let me ask the same question in a different way. That we know that Nauru actually had a diplomatic relationship with Taiwan twice, right? So, what's your advice? I mean, if there's any chance for Nauru or a country like Nauru to come back to Taiwan again, what are the government of Taiwan supposed to do?
I do not understand the DPP's foreign policy that well. But in the case of Ma Ying-jeou's presidency, actually only one country left Taiwan, that is Gambia in Africa. And after Gambia severed relations with Taipei, and actually Gambia figured out, gosh, Beijing didn't want me. So Gambia wanted to come back to Taipei's camp. But President Ma said, no, we will not be threatened or, by this kind of, diplomatic attempts of Gambia. So that's how the KMT government would do. But now it will be the DPP government led by Lai Ching-te. So I have no clue. But I want to say that all these diplomatic struggles or competitions result mainly from the state of cross-Taiwan Strait relations. So a rule of thumb and my past experience tell me that as long as cross relations can be better, then these diplomatic struggles or this tug of war in diplomacy could be avoided.
Donovan, really quick response to the same question. What's your advice to Taiwan regarding winning back countries like Nauru?
Well, yeah, they've switched diplomatic relations several times. Another country which might actually flip back is the Solomon Islands. There's two different factions there, one that supports Taiwan and one that supports China. So if there's a transfer of power, we might see the Solomon Islands return. But ultimately, there's only so much money and so many things that you can throw at the problem. And China will always be able to outspend Taiwan. So I think really what Taiwan needs to emphasize right now is strengthening the ties that they have, not just economic, but people to people, you know, and deepen the relationship with the countries that still do diplomatically recognize Taiwan.
Okay, I think it's not only about the tug of the war diplomacy, as Kwei-bo just mentioned, but it's also about the axis of evil. After 9/11, former President George W. Bush classified separate nations as part of an axis of evil, especially North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. U.S. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell recently suggested that China, Russia, and Iran constitutes a new axis of evil. So what is your thoughts on this, Donovan?
Well, I mean, you could say that, but I mean, the reality is that these three countries, you know, they don't trust each other. They don't even particularly respect each other. You know, Iran and Russia, I mean, basically the three of them will cooperate when it's in their interests, but only when it's in their interests. It's worth keeping in mind that, for example, Russia and Iran historically have not gotten along very well because they're two big regional powers and with a Caucasus in between them. And then you have China and Russia, which historically have big problems. Large parts of Siberia used to be in Manchuria. And, you know, during the 19th century, the Russians annexed a whole bunch of that from the Qing dynasty. So, you know, these countries have histories of bad blood. Now, another thing that I think is worth keeping in mind is, for example, you see the priorities come out in subtle ways. Or in this case, maybe not so subtle. If you take the Belt and Road Initiative money that China has put into Iran, in the first 10 years, it was about $350 million. Neighboring Pakistan, which recently Iran and Pakistan have been having some border troubles, has gotten $65 billion. And of course, Iran's arch nemesis, Saudi Arabia, has gotten $52 billion. And Iran only got $350 million. So they're not that close, is kind of, I think, you know. Now, Russia and China's trade has been increasing significantly recently, but that has a lot to do with this is a great export market for Chinese goods. Now there's no competition from Western goods due to sanctions. And for China, it's great because they get cheap energy and raw materials to feed their factories. It's not because they particularly like each other. I wasn't able to find the numbers, but from what I understand, the amount of Belt and Road money that's gone into Russia is very little as well.
Okay, Kwei-bo, so do you think that this trend to mark the label the new alliance as a new axis of evil, including North Korea, Iran, Iraq, not Iraq, but China, Russia, Iran, and China, will become a different stage where the United States will be on the one side, on the other hand, there's an alliance of these evil countries?
You know, politically, it's a way to mobilize your friends or potential friends to stand with you. So, such a voice from the Capitol Hill, Special Mitch McConnell, a very senior congressman in the U.S., of course, needs to be taken into account when it comes to real politics. But I think, you know, this is only a voice from the U.S., and the Biden administration has never said such a thing in public.
It would be too strong otherwise.
Yeah. And also, you know, the axis of evil, if, you know, it consists mainland China, Russia, and Iran, then what about North Korea? So at least we need 4. But so we don't want to count numbers, but I think most important is that if they are really evil, then what will the mainstream international community do in order to conquer this axis of evil? If they are not that evil, or some of them are not evil, then should we label them in order to, you know, stir up all these unnecessary tensions between these two big camps? I don't know.
But it's intriguing to ask, why does Mitch McConnell, you know, mention this, given the fact that he's also part of the government, even though it's not belong to the executive, he's belong to the legislature.
You know, legislators sometimes speaks for him or herself, or for
constituents.
him or her constituencies. So I don't know for what, but I think this is his personal opinion, and that's not part of U.S. official policy towards the so-called coalition.
Right. Donovan, do you have any notes of this? Why Mitch McConnell mentioned this in his latest speech?
Yeah, I think Dr. Huang is right. I think that was, he's a Republican, there's a Democratic administration, and I think what he wants to do is talk tough to his base. But he's got another consideration, I think, as well, and that is legislative and short term. And the issue is that right now you've got a populist wing in the Republican Party that is starting to pull away from the idea of U.S. involvement overseas and in wars, and it's becoming increasingly isolationist. Whereas traditional Republicans like Mitch McConnell, they still want a United States that's actively involved in the world and want to have military budgets and keep that involvement going. So, for example, right now, Republicans are holding up funding for Ukraine. So when you get a situation where if Mitch McConnell is appealing to traditional Republican values, or at least going post-Second World War traditional values, and so he's trying to appeal to them, and I think that partly this is tied to getting money to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. I think the budget hold up there, I think that's a part of his consideration.
Okay, Donovan and Kwei-bo, thank you for the great participation in the show.
Yeah, thank you.
In this episode, we discussed the possible new foreign minister of China, the re-emergence of the term axis of evil, and the possibility of U.S. China cooperation. Did you enjoy this episode? Leave us a message and subscribe to Taiwan Talks. See you soon.